down. Roll the window down. You cut me off back there.
I used my signal. I didn't do anything illegal.
Don't play dumb with me. I'm a cop. I can ruin your night real fast.
Am I being detained, sir? Because I'm recording this.
Keep talking and I'll put cuffs on you for reckless driving.
Then do it, but everyone's going to hear how you're acting.
The incident began at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday. David Chen, a 29-year-old software architect, was driving home from a client meeting. He was in his silver Honda Accord traveling in the right lane of I-290 when he needed to merge left to catch his exit in about 2 miles. He checked his mirror, saw a gap in traffic, put on his turn signal, and moved into the left lane. Standard driving. Nothing aggressive, nothing illegal. Behind him, in a black Dodge Charger, Officer Mark Sterling laid on his horn for a solid 5 seconds. David checked his rearview mirror, confused. The merge had been clean. He hadn't cut anyone off. There had been plenty of space. The Charger behind him was now riding his bumper close enough that David couldn't even see the car's headlights in his mirror. Then the Charger swerved into the right lane and pulled up beside him. That's when David saw the driver for the first time. A man aged roughly 45, red-faced, screaming something David couldn't hear through the closed windows. The man was gesturing wildly, pointing at David, then pointing at the road ahead. David did what most people would do. He looked straight ahead and kept driving, hoping the angry driver would just move on. He didn't. The Charger cut in front of David's Honda, forcing him to brake hard. Then the Charger slowed down dramatically, dropping from 65 mph to about 35. Traffic behind David started stacking up. Cars began moving into the right lane to pass both of them. David switched lanes to go around the Charger, but as soon as he did, the Charger matched his move, blocking him again. This went on for nearly 2 miles. David felt his heart pounding. He had dealt with aggressive drivers before, but this felt different. This felt personal, though he had no idea why. He didn't recognize the Charger or its driver. He hadn't done anything except make a legal lane change. Finally, David saw his exit approaching. He moved right, took the exit ramp, and started breathing a sigh of relief. The Charger followed him. Now David's confusion turned to genuine fear. The exit led to a state route that wound through a semi-residential area in Elmhurst. David hoped the Charger was just coincidentally taking the same exit. But when he made a right turn at the light and the Charger stayed on him, he knew something was seriously wrong. At the next red light, the Charger pulled up beside David again. This time, the driver rolled down his window. David kept his window up and his eyes forward, but he could hear the muffled shouting. Then, in a decision that would save his reputation and possibly his safety, David reached over and turned on his phone's voice recorder. He didn't try to film anything. He just wanted audio evidence in case this situation got worse. It was about to get much worse. The light turned green. Both cars proceeded through the intersection. Then the Charger suddenly cut right, forcing David towards the curb. David had to brake hard again, and this time he came to a complete stop on the side of the road. The Charger stopped directly in front of him, blocking him in. The driver got out. Mark Sterling walked toward David's Honda with purpose. He was wearing jeans and a polo shirt. David still had his windows up and his doors locked. Sterling came right up to the driver's window and started pounding on it with his palm. David grabbed his phone and started recording video. His hand was shaking, but he kept the camera pointed at the window. This recording, combined with footage from a nearby business security camera and a video taken by a passing cyclist, would piece together the complete picture of what happened next. Sterling's face filled David's window. He was shouting, spit flying from his mouth as he yelled. David, still in his car, cracked the window about an inch. The first words out of Sterling's mouth were a racial slur targeted at Asian Americans. He demanded to know why people like him didn't know how to drive. David, shocked, asked what he was talking about. Sterling launched into a screaming rant about how David had cut him off, how people from his background always drove like they owned the road, how David should go back to where he came from. The slurs kept coming, each one worse than the last. David, to his credit, stayed relatively calm. He told Sterling he had used his turn signal and merged safely. He said he didn't want any trouble. He asked Sterling to please move his car so they could both leave. Sterling's response was to pull out his police badge. He held it up to the window and told David he was a cop and that David was going to do exactly what he said, or David would end up in handcuffs facing charges for reckless driving, resisting arrest, and anything else Sterling felt like adding. The threats came in a stream. Sterling said he could make David's life hell. He said he had friends in the department who would back up any story he told. He said David was lucky he was off duty, or this would already be over. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever dealt with an aggressive driver who followed you? Type yes in the comments. It's scary, and it's about to get scarier. David made a decision in that moment that likely saved him from a far worse outcome. He started apologizing not because he had done anything wrong, but because he recognized he was dealing with someone unstable who had a badge and a gun. David said he was sorry if the merge had seemed sudden. He said he hadn't meant to cause any problems. He said he just wanted to go home. Sterling wasn't satisfied. He demanded David get out of the car. David refused as politely as possible, saying he was comfortable staying in his vehicle. Sterling slapped the hood of the Honda hard enough to leave a dent. He walked around to the front of the car, blocking it in, and called David more slurs. He questioned David's intelligence, his driving ability, his right to be in this country, even though David had been born in Chicago. A woman walking her dog on the sidewalk stopped and pulled out her phone. She started filming too. Sterling was so focused on David he didn't notice her standing about 40 feet away. Camera pointed directly at the scene. Sterling came back to the driver's window. He told David that he was going to follow him home and make sure David understood who was in charge. He said that people like David needed to learn respect. He said that if David filed any kind of complaint, Sterling would deny everything and make sure David regretted it. Then Sterling made his biggest mistake. He pulled out his personal cell phone and took a picture of David's license plate. But he didn't stop there. He walked back to David's window and demanded David hand over his driver's license. David asked if he was being detained or if Sterling was acting in his official capacity as a police officer. Sterling's face went even redder. He screamed that David was being a smartass and that he should hand over his license now. David, still recording, told Sterling that he didn't feel comfortable giving his personal information to someone who was threatening him. Sterling punched the window. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to make David jump. Sterling promised this wasn't over. He used several more slurs. He told David to watch his back because he would be seeing Sterling again. Then finally, Sterling walked back to his Charger and drove away. David sat there for a full 3 minutes shaking before he pulled back onto the road. He drove straight to the nearest police station, but not Sterling's precinct in Oak Brook. David went to the DuPage County Sheriff's Office instead. He walked in at 4:23 p.m. and asked to file a report about an off-duty police officer who had just threatened and harassed him. The deputy at the desk took his statement. David played the audio and video from his phone. The deputy's expression went from professional interest to visible concern as the slurs and threats poured out of the phone's speaker. David provided the Charger's license plate number, which he had memorized during the incident. He described Sterling and mentioned that Sterling had identified himself as a police officer and shown a badge. The deputy said he would forward the complaint to the appropriate department for investigation. David asked for a copy of the report and the case number. He thanked the deputy and left. Based on past experiences he had read about regarding police accountability, David wasn't confident anything would actually happen. He was wrong. The woman with the dog, whose name was Sarah Jenkins, had captured nearly 4 minutes of the confrontation on video. Her angle showed Sterling's face clearly. It showed him pounding on the window, punching the hood, and his aggressive body language throughout. That evening, Sarah posted the video to her social media account with a description of what she had witnessed. She tagged the police department and several local Chicago news stations. The video started spreading. By midnight, it had 15,000 views. By the next morning, it had passed 200,000. Local news picked it up, then regional news. By Saturday afternoon, national outlets were running the story. The video quality was good. Sterling's face was clearly visible, and the audio, which Sarah's phone had partially captured, included at least 3 distinct racial slurs that were audible enough to make out. The Oak Brook Police Department issued a statement Saturday evening saying they were aware of the video and were investigating the incident. They didn't name Sterling yet, but the internet had already identified him. People who recognized him from the video started sharing his name. Others dug up his public social media profiles before he could delete them. By Sunday morning, Mark Sterling's name, face, and badge number were all over the internet. David's video from inside his car surfaced Sunday afternoon when a local news station interviewed him. His footage provided the audio that Sarah's video had partially missed. Every slur, every threat. Sterling's voice clearly identifying himself as a police officer and threatening to arrest David on false charges. The combination of both videos created an undeniable record of what had happened. The police department placed Sterling on immediate administrative leave Monday morning. The police union released a statement saying they would ensure Sterling received due process, but didn't defend his actions. That alone was significant. Police unions often circle the wagons immediately. The fact that they didn't suggested the video evidence was simply too damning. The investigation moved quickly by police department standards, which meant it still took weeks, but there was never much doubt about the outcome. The videos were clear. David's contemporaneous complaint to the sheriff's office established a timeline. Sarah's eyewitness account as a neutral third party corroborated everything. The business security camera from a shop near where the confrontation happened provided yet another angle, though, from farther away. Investigators also pulled Sterling's patrol car footage from the previous 6 months. They found 3 incidents where Sterling's interactions with minority drivers during traffic stops showed similar hostility, though nothing quite as explicit as the road rage incident. In each case, the driver had filed a complaint. In each case, the complaint had been dismissed or resulted in minimal discipline. Those drivers were now being re-interviewed. The internal affairs investigation concluded that Sterling had violated multiple department policies. He had used racial slurs. He had threatened a civilian. He had misused his authority as a police officer while off duty. He had made threats to file false charges. He had engaged in conduct unbecoming of an officer. The report was 37 pages long, and it recommended termination. Sterling had the option to resign. His attorney advised him to take it to avoid being formally fired, which would make it nearly impossible to work in law enforcement anywhere else. But by this point, that ship had sailed. Sterling's face and name were attached to a viral video showing racist harassment. No police department in the country was going to hire him. Sterling resigned on June 14, 2022, exactly 28 days after the incident. His resignation letter was 1 paragraph long and didn't include an apology. The police department accepted his resignation and issued a statement saying Sterling was no longer employed by the department and his actions didn't reflect their values or training. The public reaction was mixed. Many people felt justice had been served. Sterling had lost his career and his reputation. Others pointed out that he was not facing criminal charges and would still receive a portion of his pension for the 20 years he had served. Some argued that if Sterling felt comfortable acting this way off-duty on camera in broad daylight, how had he been acting during his 2 decades in uniform when cameras weren't rolling? That question led to a broader review. The department examined all complaints filed against Sterling during his career. They found 22 complaints, which was higher than average, but not extraordinarily high for a 20-year veteran. Most had been deemed unfounded or resulted in minor discipline. But when investigators looked closer, they noticed a pattern. 19 of the 22 complaints came from Black, Latino, or Asian civilians. The complaints included allegations of excessive force during an arrest, disrespectful language, unnecessarily aggressive behavior, and bias in who Sterling chose to stop and question. Do you think officers like this are rare, or is this more common than we think? The statistics might surprise you, and they're coming up. Each complaint by itself hadn't raised red flags, but together they painted a picture of an officer with a bias problem that had been either missed or ignored for 2 decades. The department faced serious questions about their oversight and complaint review process. How had Sterling continued working with minimal consequences, despite a pattern of complaints focused on his treatment of minorities? 3 of the civilians who had filed complaints against Sterling hired attorneys and filed civil rights lawsuits against both Sterling and the police department. They argued the department had been negligent in supervising Sterling and had ignored warning signs of his racial bias. David also filed a lawsuit seeking damages for emotional distress harassment and civil rights violations. Sterling's attorney tried to argue that the road rage incident was an isolated bad day, a momentary lapse in judgment brought on by stress, but the previous complaints combined with the virality of the video made that argument nearly impossible to sustain. The lawsuits were eventually settled out of court for undisclosed amounts, though legal analysts estimated the city paid out somewhere in the range of several $100,000 total. Sterling disappeared from public view. He deleted his social media accounts. He moved out of the area. Attempts by journalists to reach him for comment went unanswered. His police union didn't mount any public defense. His former colleagues, when asked, universally declined to comment or said they were shocked by the video. But some of Sterling's former colleagues told a different story when reporters promised anonymity. 2 officers who had worked with Sterling described him as someone who frequently made racist jokes in the locker room. One recalled Sterling referring to certain neighborhoods using slurs and saying he treated stops differently based on the racial makeup of the area. Another remembered Sterling bragging about making traffic stops difficult for drivers he felt were disrespectful, which seemed to correlate with those drivers being minorities. None of these officers had reported Sterling's behavior. When asked why, they gave familiar answers. They didn't think anyone would take it seriously. They didn't want to be labeled a snitch. They thought Sterling was just blowing off steam and didn't actually act on his biases while on duty, though the complaint record suggested otherwise. The police department implemented new training focused on recognizing and addressing bias. They revised their complaint review process to look for patterns across multiple complaints rather than treating each as an isolated incident. They created a new position specifically dedicated to reviewing officer conduct and ensuring accountability. Whether these changes would have lasting impact remained to be seen. David eventually spoke at a city council meeting about his experience. He described the fear he felt during the confrontation, not knowing if Sterling would escalate to physical violence or use his position as a police officer to arrest or harm him. David talked about the decision calculus he had to make in real time, whether to comply with an aggressive person making unreasonable demands or assert his rights and risk the situation getting worse. He explained how he had apologized for something he didn't do wrong because he was afraid of what an angry cop might do to him. His testimony was powerful because it highlighted something many people never have to consider. David had done everything right. He had merged safely driven legally and responded to aggression with calm attempts to de-escalate. And still he found himself targeted, threatened, and harassed simply because of his race, and because he had the misfortune of crossing paths with an officer who saw him as less deserving of respect. The video remained online reshared whenever discussions about police accountability and racism surfaced. It became a teaching tool in some police academies as an example of how not to behave, and how bias can destroy a career and public trust. It was cited in academic papers about police culture and accountability. It appeared in documentaries examining racism in law enforcement. For Mark Sterling, those 11 minutes on a Thursday afternoon cost him everything. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. His face was permanently associated with racism and abuse of authority. He couldn't work in law enforcement again. Background checks for any job would immediately surface the viral video and news coverage. Some people felt this was appropriate justice. Sterling's actions had consequences, and those consequences were severe. Others argued that one incident, however terrible, shouldn't define an entire life, though the subsequent investigation suggested it was not actually one incident, but rather the most visible example of a long-standing problem. What made Sterling's case particularly notable wasn't just the severity of his behavior or the clarity of the video evidence. It was the combination of factors that prevented the usual circling of wagons that often protects officers from accountability. The video was too clear. The slurs were too explicit. The abuse of authority was too obvious. The third-party witness eliminated any he said, she said ambiguity, and the viral spread meant the department couldn't quietly handle it internally. Without all of those factors aligning, Sterling might have faced a few days of suspension and mandatory counseling. David's complaint might have joined the other 19 in Sterling's file noted but not acted upon. Sterling might have continued patrolling the city streets until retirement. That's what made the case both encouraging and deeply troubling. Encouraging because accountability happened. Troubling because it required such an extreme set of circumstances, multiple clear videos viral, spread massive public pressure and undeniable evidence to achieve what should have happened years earlier based on the pattern of complaints alone. The incident also highlighted the role of technology in police accountability. If David hadn't recorded audio and video, if Sarah hadn't captured footage, if the business security camera hadn't caught another angle, the encounter would have been David's word against the police officers. History suggests how that would have ended. Sterling could have filed a report claiming David had driven recklessly and been belligerent, and David would have faced charges with little recourse. Instead, the cameras told the truth. They preserved every slur, every threat, every second of abuse. They created a record that couldn't be disputed or reinterpreted. They protected David from false charges and exposed Sterling's racism and abuse of authority. For David, the vindication came at a cost. His face was also in the viral video. His name was in news reports. He received both support and disturbingly harassment from people who thought he had overreacted or gotten a cop fired over nothing. He had to relive the incident repeatedly as the investigation proceeded, as news outlets interviewed him, and as the lawsuits moved forward. But David also heard from dozens of other people who shared their own stories of being harassed or mistreated by police officers. Incidents that happened without cameras rolling, complaints that went nowhere. His decision to report the incident and share his video, despite knowing it would thrust him into an uncomfortable spotlight, provided validation for others who had similar experiences, but no proof. The road rage incident lasted 11 minutes. The investigation took weeks. The career destruction was permanent, and the questions it raised about police accountability, racism in law enforcement, and the systems that allow problematic officers to continue working despite warning signs remain relevant and largely unanswered. Mark Sterling's racist road rage didn't just ruin his career. It exposed the gaps in accountability systems that had allowed his behavior to continue unchecked for 20 years. It demonstrated how many complaints and how much evidence it takes to actually hold an officer accountable. And it showed that sometimes justice requires not just victims being willing to come forward, but also the right combination of technology witnesses and public attention to force systems to work the way they're supposed to. The viral video has now been viewed over 30 million times. The comment sections remain active with debates about police accountability, racism, and consequences. And somewhere Mark Sterling is living with the reality that his worst moment was captured in high definition and will follow him forever, while the communities he patrolled are left wondering how many other officers like him are still out there, just one bad day away from their own viral exposure. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true character isn't defined by how someone behaves when they are wearing a uniform and know the world is watching, but by how they treat those with less power when they believe no one is looking. It also teaches us that in an age where nearly everyone carries a camera accountability, can finally catch up to those who abuse their authority, proving that the truth once documented becomes undeniable regardless of the badge someone holds.